Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to stand before you today and share a message that, in times of hardship and uncertainty, can bring solace and hope. The topic I have been asked to speak on is God didn't let you suffer for no reason. It's a statement that carries deep significance and can touch the hearts of many. In a world filled with challenges, pain, and suffering, it is easy to ask why we experience such hardships. We may feel abandoned or lost, wondering if there is a purpose to the struggles we endure. But I stand before you today to remind you that everything happens for a reason, even the most difficult moments in life. Each of us, at some point in our lives, has faced moments of difficulty. Whether it is personal loss, illness, financial strain, or even the burden of simply feeling stuck, suffering is part of the human experience. But what if we could look at our suffering through a different lens? What if, instead of questioning why we have to go through these challenges, we could begin to see them as opportunities for growth, transformation, and deepening our faith? God doesn't allow suffering to take place arbitrarily or without purpose. It is not a sign of abandonment or lack of love. Rather, suffering is a tool that, when approached with the right perspective, can help us grow stronger in ways we never imagined possible. Every hardship carries with it the seeds of growth if we are willing to nurture them. In the scriptures, we are reminded time and time again that suffering is not in vain. In the book of James, we are told to consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. James 1:2-3. This is not an easy teaching, especially in moments of deep pain. Yet it is a message that reminds us that our suffering has a purpose. Through the trials we face, we are being refined, much like gold is purified in the fire. The idea of suffering producing perseverance and perseverance leading to maturity is one that encourages us to endure through our difficulties. It teaches us that what may seem like a burden in the moment is often shaping us into something stronger. Every trial, every obstacle, every moment of grief or pain is, in essence, a refining process. It is God working in us, shaping our character and preparing us for what lies ahead. Another powerful reminder comes from the story of Job. In his story, we see a man who experienced unimaginable suffering, loss of wealth, health, and loved ones. And yet, Job never lost his faith. He questioned and lamented, but ultimately he trusted in God's plan. Job's story teaches us that while suffering may not make sense in the moment, there is always a greater purpose at work, even if we cannot see it with our limited perspective. Job was later rewarded for his faithfulness, but more importantly, through his suffering, he was brought into a deeper, more intimate relationship with God. It was in his lowest moments that he encountered God in ways that transformed him forever. This brings me to another point. Suffering can deepen our connection to God. It can push us to places of vulnerability and desperation where we are forced to rely on Him fully. When everything around us seems to be falling apart, when we feel like we have nothing left to give, that is when we often experience the presence of God most profoundly. In those moments of suffering, we learn to lean not on our own understanding, but on the strength that only God can provide. Think about the times in your life when you felt most alone, most broken, most overwhelmed. I would wager that in those moments, you also experience God's love and presence in a way that you hadn't before. Sometimes it is only through our suffering that we are able to truly comprehend the depth of God's mercy and grace. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 12:9, but he said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." This is a powerful truth. God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Suffering has the potential to change our perspective. It has a way of revealing what truly matters in life. When we face hardship, the things that once seemed important, money, status, material possessions, begin to lose their hold on us. Instead, we start to focus on the things that truly matter: love, faith, family, and community. Suffering has a way of stripping away the superficial and reminding us of what is truly essential in life. Moreover, our suffering can lead to healing and restoration, not only for ourselves but for others as well. When we endure pain and suffering, we become more empathetic toward others who are struggling. Our experiences can help us to walk alongside others in their own difficulties, offering comfort, encouragement, and a sense of solidarity. The Apostle Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 1:4 that God comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. In other words, our suffering can equip us to help others who are going through similar experiences. We are not meant to suffer in isolation. Instead, we are called to support one another and share the comfort we receive from God. While it may be difficult to grasp in the moment, the truth is that God's purpose in our suffering is often not something we can fully understand until later on in life. In the midst of pain, it's hard to see the bigger picture. However, as we reflect back on our lives, we often realize that the very struggles we once resented or despised were the ones that shaped us into the person we are today. If you are currently in the midst of suffering, it may feel impossible to see how there could be a greater purpose behind it. It may feel like the pain will never end, that the darkness will never lift. But trust that there is a reason for what you are going through. God does not let us suffer without cause. Every tear, every moment of grief, every challenge is part of a larger story, your story. And God is working in you, refining you, molding you into the person He has called you to be. We may not always understand why certain things happen, but we can trust that God is good and He loves us deeply. He is not distant or indifferent to our pain. He is with us in our suffering, walking beside us, holding us up when we are too weak to stand on our own. Suffering has always been a central theme in human existence. From the earliest recorded histories to the stories of individuals we encounter daily, suffering is an inevitable part of life. While the experience of suffering is deeply personal, it is also universally shared. Each of us, at some point in our lives, will face hardship, loss, pain, or challenges that seem impossible to overcome. The question often arises, why does suffering exist? What purpose could it possibly serve in a world created by a loving and all-powerful God? These are questions that have troubled people for centuries. Yet, despite the difficulty of understanding suffering, there is a profound truth to be found in the belief that suffering has a purpose. One of the first and most important things to understand about suffering is that it is not without meaning. God does not allow suffering to occur for no reason, nor is it a random, senseless part of life. While we may not always immediately see the purpose in our suffering, we are told through faith that it serves a greater purpose in the grand design of life. In fact, suffering, though painful, can be a means of transformation and growth. It has the power to shape us into stronger, more compassionate, and more resilient individuals. This transformation often comes when we allow ourselves to process our pain in a way that leads to healing rather than bitterness. The idea that suffering has purpose may sound contradictory, especially when faced with overwhelming pain. How can suffering, which causes emotional and physical distress, have a beneficial effect on us? How can something that tears us down also build us up? The key to understanding this paradox is recognizing that suffering is a vehicle for growth. In every painful experience, there are opportunities for growth and self-discovery, even if those opportunities are not immediately obvious. Just as a seed must break through the earth to become a tree, so too do we often need to break through the pain and hardship to experience a new level of spiritual maturity, understanding, and wisdom. One way suffering can have a purpose is by refining our character. Life is filled with challenges that test our limits, and it is often through these trials that our true character is revealed. In times of suffering, we are forced to confront our vulnerabilities and weaknesses. It is in these moments that we have the opportunity to grow in humility, patience, empathy, and resilience. When we are tested by suffering, our responses can shape who we become. It is easy to remain calm and composed when life is smooth and uncomplicated, but it is when we face adversity that we learn who we truly are and what we are made of. Suffering is not a punishment, rather, it is a tool that helps us build the strength of character that we will need to face future challenges. The process of refining through suffering is particularly evident in the way we handle adversity. Some people become bitter and resentful in the face of suffering, while others rise above their circumstances with grace and perseverance. The difference often lies in how we choose to respond to our suffering. Suffering can either break us or make us stronger, depending on our attitude toward it. When we face hardship with faith and trust in God, we allow our suffering to become a means of growth rather than destruction. By learning to endure and persevere through our trials, we cultivate virtues such as courage, perseverance, and faith. These virtues not only help us through our current struggles, but also prepare us for the challenges that lie ahead. Without suffering, it is difficult to develop these qualities, as they are often only revealed when we are forced to confront our limitations and weaknesses. Suffering also serves as a tool for spiritual growth. It is through our suffering that we often come to realize the limitations of our own strength and the depth of our need for God. When everything seems to be falling apart, when we are overwhelmed by circumstances beyond our control, we are reminded that we are not in charge of our own lives. Our suffering humbles us and pushes us to a place of surrender, where we can learn to rely on God's strength instead of our own. The Apostle Paul speaks about this in 2 Corinthians 12:9, when God tells him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." It is in our weakest moments, when we are most aware of our need for help, that we experience God's strength in a profound way. Suffering then becomes a catalyst for deepening our faith as we turn to God for comfort, wisdom, and guidance. Through our trials, we discover a deeper relationship with Him, learning to trust Him in ways we may not have before. Moreover, suffering has the power to lead us to self-reflection and introspection. When we are in pain, it often prompts us to examine our lives and consider the choices we've made. We are forced to ask ourselves difficult questions: what is truly important? How have we been living? Are we fulfilling our purpose? These questions, though uncomfortable, often lead to life-changing realizations. Suffering has a way of cutting through the noise of daily life, forcing us to slow down and reflect on our values and priorities. It can lead us to a place of repentance and transformation, where we begin to make different choices and live more intentionally. In this way, suffering can push us toward a more meaningful life. It challenges us to re-evaluate our goals and motivations and to live more authentically. For example, suffering can prompt us to prioritize relationships over material success, to seek inner peace rather than an outward approval, and to deepen our connection to the things that truly matter. When we go through pain, we often realize that the things we once thought were important, wealth, status, or superficial success, are fleeting and ultimately unsatisfying. Instead, we begin to value love, faith, community, and service. The pain we experience helps us to let go of the things that don't bring lasting fulfillment and to focus on what really matters. Another important purpose of suffering is its potential to foster empathy and compassion. It is often through our own suffering that we become more attuned to the pain of others. When we experience hardship, we develop a greater understanding of the struggles that others face. We learn to walk alongside them in their pain, offering comfort and encouragement from a place of shared experience. Suffering has a way of breaking down barriers between people as it reminds us of our common humanity. It makes us more compassionate toward others, more willing to offer a listening ear, a helping hand, or a word of encouragement. Through suffering, we are able to see the world through the eyes of those who are hurting, and we are more inclined to act with kindness and generosity. This compassion is not limited to those who are close to us, it extends to all of humanity. When we recognize the universality of suffering, we become more aware of the struggles that others face, whether they are near or far. This awareness can lead to a greater sense of social responsibility and a desire to alleviate the suffering of others. Many individuals who have gone through deep personal suffering go on to dedicate their lives to helping those who are suffering in different ways. Their pain has propelled them into action, leading them to become advocates for change, leaders of charitable causes, or sources of support for those in need. Ultimately, suffering's purpose is not just about personal growth, it also has a broader purpose in the context of the world around us. It is through suffering that we learn the importance of love, kindness, and sacrifice. It is through suffering that we become more aware of the needs of others and are moved to act with generosity and compassion. Suffering challenges us to live beyond ourselves and to consider the welfare of others. It reminds us that life is not just about our own happiness or comfort, but about how we can contribute to the well-being of others. In conclusion, suffering has a profound purpose that extends far beyond the immediate pain we experience. It refines our character, deepens our faith, leads to self-reflection, fosters empathy, and encourages us to live a more meaningful life. While suffering is undeniably difficult, it is not without meaning. When we approach our struggles with faith and a willingness to learn from them, we discover that suffering can be a powerful tool for personal and spiritual transformation. Though we may not always understand the reasons for our pain, we can trust that God uses it to shape us into the individuals we are meant to be. Suffering has an uncanny way of shifting our perspective, breaking down the barriers we place around ourselves, and putting us into a deeper connection with God. It is a part of the human experience that no matter how much we might wish to avoid it, seems to be inevitable. The intense trials and challenges we face in life, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, often bring us to a place of vulnerability. It is in that place of vulnerability that we are most likely to experience a profound encounter with God. Suffering, in its most painful form, serves as a crucible where our relationship with God is refined and deepened. For many people, the idea of suffering can seem like a contradiction to the belief in a loving, all-powerful God. How could a good and merciful God allow suffering to take place? This question has haunted countless individuals throughout history. Yet the Bible is full of stories where suffering becomes the very thing that strengthens the relationship between individuals and God. It is in the moments of deep pain and anguish that people often draw closest to God, discovering aspects of His character that they may never have encountered during times of ease. Suffering has the ability to reveal the depth of our need for God. When everything in life is going well, when we are healthy, prosperous, and in control, we may take our relationship with God for granted. It's easy to think we have everything under control when life is smooth. But it is in times of suffering that we are reminded of our limitations. Suffering strips away the illusion of self-sufficiency and shows us how fragile we are. It is in our weakness that we recognize our need for God, and this recognition leads us to a deeper dependence on Him. Just as a child reaches out for their parent in times of distress, we too find ourselves calling out to God when we are in pain. In those moments, we experience a closeness with Him that cannot be replicated during times of comfort and ease. The psalmist often spoke of God as a refuge in times of trouble, and many of the psalms are cries of anguish from people who felt abandoned by God but ultimately found solace and strength in Him. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." This verse reveals a profound truth. It is often in our brokenness that we encounter God most intimately. When we are at our lowest, when we feel as though we have nothing left to give, God meets us in that place of vulnerability. He does not turn away from our pain. Instead, He draws near to us, offering comfort and healing in ways that we would not experience otherwise. One of the most powerful aspects of suffering is that it often brings us to a place where we are forced to lean on God in a way that we might not have before. It's easy to pray when life is good and everything is going according to plan. But when we find ourselves in deep pain, struggling with grief, loss, or illness, we are more likely to turn to God out of sheer desperation. This desperation is not a weakness, rather. It is an acknowledgement of our need for God's strength and help. In moments of suffering, we are more likely to pray with a rawness and honesty that we may not express when everything is going well. We pour out our hearts to God in ways that draw us closer to Him. In the midst of our pain, we often experience the profound reality of God's love and presence in a way that transcends words. It is through suffering that we truly come to understand that God is not just a distant, impersonal force, but a loving Father who is deeply invested in our lives. Throughout the Bible, we see the consistent theme that suffering is not a sign of God's abandonment, but rather an invitation to grow closer to Him. Jesus Himself, though sinless and perfect, suffered deeply. His suffering on the cross was the ultimate act of love and sacrifice for the salvation of humanity. In His suffering, Jesus not only paid the price for our sins, but He also identified with the pain of humanity. Hebrews 4:15 tells us, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way. Just as we are, yet He did not sin." Jesus' experience of suffering allows us to understand that God is not indifferent to our pain. Rather, He is fully aware of our suffering because He experienced it Himself. This deep empathy is one of the ways that suffering deepens our relationship with God. When we suffer, we find that Jesus understands our pain and walks with us through it. In addition to drawing us closer to God in our moments of weakness, suffering also strengthens our faith. It's easy to have faith when things are going well, but true faith is often forged in the fires of adversity. James 1:2-4 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." These verses remind us that suffering is not only an opportunity to draw closer to God, but also to deepen our faith in Him. When we experience hardship and continue to trust God, our faith becomes stronger. We learn to depend on Him more fully, trusting in His goodness and faithfulness, even when circumstances seem bleak. suffering also provides an opportunity for God to reveal more of himself to us. When we are in pain, when we are struggling with the weight of life's difficulties, we are more likely to seek God and his presence. It is often in these times of suffering that we experience God's love, mercy, and grace in ways that we cannot during times of comfort. In the midst of pain, we may find ourselves more attuned to the voice of God, more open to hearing his guidance, and more willing to submit to his will. In the book of Job, after experiencing tremendous loss and suffering, Job says to God, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Job 42:5. Job's suffering brought him into a deeper, more intimate knowledge of God. It is through suffering that we often gain a clearer understanding of God's nature and his plans for our lives. Another way suffering deepens our relationship with God is by teaching us to rely on his strength rather than our own. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, Paul writes about his own experience with suffering, "But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me.'" This passage highlights a profound truth. It is in our weakness that God's strength is most evident. When we are strong, we may feel as though we can handle things on our own, but it is in our moments of weakness and suffering that we are reminded of our need for God's power to carry us through. Suffering strips away our self-sufficiency and forces us to rely on God's grace. And in that reliance, we experience a deeper relationship with him as we learn to trust his strength rather than our own. Ultimately, suffering refines our character and builds perseverance, but it also deepens our relationship with God in profound ways. It pushes us to trust him more fully, seek him more earnestly, and love him more deeply. The intimate relationship we cultivate with God in times of pain and hardship often becomes a foundation of strength that we carry with us throughout our lives. We come to understand that God is not a distant observer of suffering, but a loving Father who is with us in the midst of it. Through suffering, we are drawn closer to God, and in that closeness we find the strength, hope, and comfort we need to endure and overcome. Suffering is often seen as a deeply personal experience, one that isolates us and leaves us in a state of grief, pain, or despair. When we are in the midst of suffering, it can feel as though we are alone, that our pain is uniquely our own, and that no one can truly understand what we are going through. However, the paradox of suffering is that, while it does challenge us on a personal level, it also equips us in unique ways to reach out and offer comfort to others who are experiencing their own pain. Through our suffering, we gain empathy, understanding, and wisdom qualities that enable us to extend a hand of compassion to others. This is not to say that suffering is easy or that it makes us immune to the pain we feel, but it is through our struggles that we often become more attuned to the needs of others, more capable of offering genuine comfort and support. One of the most profound ways suffering enables us to comfort others is by developing our ability to empathize. Before experiencing hardship ourselves, we may have a theoretical understanding of pain, but it is only through first-hand experience that we can truly grasp the depth of another person's suffering. When we endure a painful trial, whether it be the loss of a loved one, a serious illness, broken relationship, or a financial struggle, we gain a deeper appreciation for what it means to be vulnerable, to be afraid, or to feel completely overwhelmed. We come to understand that suffering is not something that can be easily fixed or explained away, but a journey that requires patience, understanding, and emotional presence. This shared understanding of pain allows us to connect with others in a way that is more authentic and profound. We are no longer simply offering platitudes or advice from a distance. Instead, we are able to offer a kind of companionship that acknowledges the weight of another's burden. When someone shares their pain with us, we can look them in the eye and say, "I know what it feels like," not because we have experienced exactly the same thing, but because we understand the universal nature of suffering. In those moments, our suffering becomes a bridge between us and others, enabling us to offer the comfort and solidarity that they desperately need. It is in the midst of suffering that we truly learn how to weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. Another way suffering enables us to comfort others is by deepening our sense of compassion. Compassion is not just about feeling sorry for someone, it is about actively wanting to ease their pain, to lift them up, and to provide relief in whatever form that may take. Suffering forces us to acknowledge our own vulnerability and our own need for help. When we experience hardship, we often realize how much we rely on the support of others, whether it is through emotional encouragement, practical assistance, or simply the presence of a caring person. It is through this realization that we become more compassionate toward others, wanting to offer them the same kind of support and care that we have received. Our own suffering teaches us that we are not islands unto ourselves, that we are all interconnected, and that in the face of pain, the most healing thing we can do is to be there for one another. Compassion is a natural outgrowth of our suffering. When we have felt the sting of loss, the weight of loneliness, or the ache of uncertainty, we are more inclined to extend grace to others who are struggling. We no longer see people's pain as something to be fixed or dismissed, but something to be held, validated, and respected. This shift in perspective can be transformative, not only for the people we seek to comfort, but for ourselves as well. By stepping into someone else's suffering and offering comfort, we are healed in ways we may not have expected. This dynamic is beautifully illustrated in 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, which says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles." So that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. In these verses, we see that the comfort we receive from God in our own suffering enables us to extend that same comfort to others. The love and grace we experience from God become the foundation upon which we can build a ministry of compassion and support for those around us. Moreover, suffering can serve as a tool for developing patience and humility, both of which are essential in the process of comforting others. When we experience suffering, we are often forced to wait, whether it's waiting for healing, for the resolution of a difficult situation, or for the peace that only time can bring. This waiting, though painful, teaches us the value of patience as we learn to endure the difficult moments and trust that God's timing is perfect. When we offer comfort to others, it is important to approach their pain with the same patience we learned in our own suffering. It is easy to want to rush in and fix things, but true comfort often comes in the form of simply being present and waiting with someone in their pain. We learn to listen, to sit with them in their discomfort, and to let them express their grief without the need to offer immediate solutions. Patience allows us to honor the unique journey that each person is on, recognizing that healing takes time and that everyone moves through pain at their own pace. In addition to patience, suffering also cultivates humility. When we are going through hardship, we often realize how little control we have over our circumstances. Suffering reminds us that we are not invincible, that we are not immune to the trials of life. This humbling experience shifts our perspective and makes us more sensitive to the needs of others. We become less likely to offer judgment or quick fixes and more likely to meet others with understanding and grace. Humility allows us to approach those who are suffering with gentleness and kindness, recognizing that we are all in need of God's mercy and that no one is exempt from experiencing hardship. This humility creates a safe space for others to open up about their pain without fear of judgment or criticism. Another important way suffering enables us to comfort others is by providing us with opportunities for practical help. While emotional support is vital, suffering often requires tangible assistance as well. When we are in pain, we may find ourselves needing help with day-to-day tasks, such as cooking meals, running errands, or caring for children. Our own experiences with suffering teach us how to offer this kind of practical help to others. We learn to recognize when someone needs assistance, and we are more likely to offer our time, energy, and resources to ease their burden. Sometimes the most meaningful way we can comfort someone is by showing up in practical ways, offering a meal, helping with chores, or simply being there when they need someone to lean on. These small acts of kindness can have a profound impact, demonstrating the love and care that we ourselves have received during our own times of suffering. Suffering also enables us to comfort others by fostering a sense of solidarity and community. When we are suffering, we often feel isolated, as though we are the only ones going through such pain. However, as we reach out to others and share our experiences, we begin to realize that we are not alone in our suffering. Everyone faces difficulties, and by acknowledging our shared humanity, we create a space where others can find comfort and support. Through our suffering, we are able to build stronger communities where people are willing to be vulnerable, to share their struggles, and to support one another. These communities become a source of strength and hope, where people can find solace in knowing that they are not walking through life's challenges alone. In conclusion, suffering is not just an individual experience, it is something that connects us to others in profound ways. Through our suffering, we develop the empathy, compassion, patience, and humility needed to comfort those who are hurting. The comfort we receive during our own pain becomes a gift that we can offer to others, extending grace, love, and practical help in their times of need. Suffering, though painful, serves as a powerful tool for building relationships, strengthening communities, and reflecting the love of God to those around us. By embracing our own suffering and allowing it to transform us, we become vessels of comfort and healing to others who are in need of solace. In the end, suffering is not pointless. It is not a cruel punishment or a sign of God's disfavor. It is an opportunity for growth, for transformation, and for a deeper relationship with God. So when you find yourself in the midst of a trial, remember this: God didn't let you suffer for no reason. There is purpose in your pain, even if it is not immediately clear. Trust that God is working in you and through you, and that He will bring good out of even the most difficult situations. So to everyone here today who is struggling, who feels weighed down by the burdens of life, I encourage you to hold on to hope. God is with you, and your suffering is not in vain. It has a purpose, one that is far greater than you can see right now. Keep trusting in Him, keep persevering, and know that He is with you every step of the way. Thank you.